Hello landing crew and welcome to today's video. I am going to be talking about the signs of autism that we saw in Penelope. And if you don't know who Penelope is, she is my 17-month-old daughter who was recently diagnosed with level 3 autism. If you haven't watched that video, I encourage you to do it because it's going to answer a lot of questions that people have, how she was diagnosed so early, what therapy she's in. This is specifically going to be only the signs that we saw in Penelope. Usually in videos, I will go over, oh, this is what a typical child should be doing, and that's why it's different than what Penelope's doing, but I've done that so many times, so I will link Liam's video where I kind of broke down like what he should have been doing at 18 months and what he was doing if you're more interested in what a typical child development should look like. Just like always, if your child has one or two of these signs, that doesn't mean that they have autism, but if they don't have it all, that doesn't mean they don't. This is specifically about Penelope, my daughter. I know a lot of times I'll also get comments that, hey, like this sounds like a typical child, and that's the thing. At a younger age, an autistic child looks a lot like a typical child if you don't know exactly what to be looking for. I mean, guys, I completely missed it. Like, we moved here and I thought she only had feeding issues. You can be well versed in autism and still miss the signs and what to look for. It's normal for a child to be delayed in one area or have one issue. Like if they aren't talking, there's many kids that aren't talking by 18 months, two and a half, and they're not on the spectrum. They're just delayed in speech. In order to get an autism diagnosis, and especially in order to get an autism diagnosis this young, you have to have quite a few of the traits. But even if it isn't this young, even if you're getting 3 or 4 or 5-year-old evaluated, they have to have so many traits from each category. It can't just be one thing. It can't just be that they're speech delayed. Please only leave comments if you're going to be helpful. This isn't an easy video for me to make. It just isn't. This actually video is being filmed before I talk about her story of how Penelope was diagnosed. I'm only doing this because I know it could be helpful to others, but this is hard for me. It's not a place I thought I would be again. So please just be kind and be gentle. Okay, so I kind of have taken a lot of notes from things we've seen, things that the therapist has saw. I've read a lot of reports. If you've watched her story, you already know that. So sensory is definitely one that we obviously knew from a pretty early age. One thing that I noticed is that she doesn't like going outside. She's not a child that enjoys doing things. Like when we go hiking, everyone loves it but her. At first I thought that it was just like her being picky, because even before the pandemic we would like go out and do things and she was just not loving it. She would whine and fuss the whole time, but then when we would put her back in her car seat and go driving, she'd be fine. She's an amazing traveler, but once she's like somewhere where like the sun's bright outside, she just doesn't dig it, okay? And then her sleep for a few days after would be completely messed up. She's actually an amazing sleeper, except for if we do like family activities. The few nights after that, it's just messed up. Everything's messed up. I didn't think anything of it, but apparently that can also be like kind of a trait of having sensory issues and transitions and things like that. Obviously, the feeding issue, as I said, she's had feeding issues from the very get-go. We started to introduce baby food to her, like with all of our other kids, between 6 to 7 months, and it wasn't happening. Everyone told me, oh, she's just not ready. She's just not ready. And I felt like it was something else just from her reaction. Even when she was like 9, 10, 11 months old, she would like gag on the food, of course, but she'd also like, her body would like start like shaking. She doesn't do the body shaking thing anymore, but she still does have a lot of issues with eating different textures and even touching textures. There are some fruits and vegetables she won't even pick up. She tries to pick up and she'll just immediately drop it. So that was probably our first clue that there was something going on as far as sensory wise. One thing I've noticed, and I have no idea what it has to do with anything, but she will crawl along the wall near the baseboard, just going straight, but then the whole time she's looking at the baseboard as she's doing it. It looks very, very strange. It's almost like she's just following the baseboard and just keeps following it. She also has an obsession with like licking smooth surfaces. So like windows, she just loves licking things that are just like a smooth surface, like plastic or glass. So these things I'm mentioning is how she reacts now. Like, she didn't always react this way. As I said, up until 10 months old, she seemed like a typical baby. She loved cuddles and all of that. But now she doesn't really cuddle. Like, even when she's tired earlier, I was trying to rock her and she just kept arching up her body. So she will tolerate like being in our lap and like her facing forward. She seems to be okay with that, but she is not a cuddly toddler at all. Something else we've noticed is that she's obsessed with like ceiling fans and like the lights. She'll just stare at the fans, just stare at the lights. When she grabs cars, she'll just put them up to her face and just spin the wheel of the car over and over and over. The last part of sensory is probably what kind of cued me in that something else was going on and this wasn't just like a typical sensory thing. It is common with toddlers to STEM. And it's even common with people who just have sensory issues, not autism, to STEM. However, her STEMs definitely seemed really, really intense, more so than I've personally ever seen with a sensory kid. The hand flapping and hand shaking, I didn't think too much about because our 2.5-year-old Liam, he's on the spectrum as well, and he does those things as well. And also those can be normal stems. Like, toddlers can sometimes just stem just because that's how they're like figuring out their environment and things like that. But the older she got, the more STEM she got and the more intense they got. And usually it's the opposite. Like, when they're young, like 10, 11, 12 months old, they'll have like a little bit of STEM while they're like figuring out the world around them. And then as they get older, the STEM decreases and then eventually usually goes away. Because we all do STEM in some way. When she was like 10 months old, she started having hand STEM. Now she has it where she basically tenses up her face and her arm, and she'll just do it over and over and over, and then she'll let go and like breathe like a relief almost, and then she'll do it again and again. So she definitely has a lot of stemming. Her stemming is wide range. Like, you think of it, she probably does it. She does the hand stem in front of her eyes. She does it where if she gets really intense on an object, she'll tense up her face and tense up her arm when she's doing it too. She has a head shaking stem. She rocks. She rotates her ankles. She hand flaps. Then she also has a thing that kind of looks like a wave a little bit. So it's really, really cute. But then she also like has a finger tapping stem. She has a lot of stems, a lot of stems. She loves vocal stemming. Sometimes she'll also just like have like a face stem, like where she's just like tensing up her face and letting go, tensing it up, letting go. That was probably the one thing that kept me from living in denial too long, just because I knew her reactions weren't typical. And you can kind of be like, well, maybe she'll eventually point, or maybe she'll eventually respond to her name, or maybe it's this, or maybe it's that. When a child stems like that much, that intense, the older they get, the more stems they get. When therapists start noticing, it's kind of hard to deny. So as I said, she was a typical kid until 10 months old. And then slowly things just kind of, I don't know, kind of went a little bit sideways, I guess. She never really played with toys, but when she was about 11 months old, she got a bunch of toys for Christmas. I felt like her reaction at that point was a pretty typical reaction. But I do remember back then, like, she was just like away from everyone. She would still cry when we left the room. When she was 8 to 9 months old, my best friend at the time, her and I were like practicing it with her to see if she'd respond to her name. And she responded half the time. I don't know if she was responding to her name or a familiar voice, but she definitely gave mention to it. She was cuddly back then. She loved being cuddled. I remember there were times I would have her on live stream and I would just be holding her and she'd just fall asleep in my arms. It was like, for that time period, we got to experience what a typical child was like. She also did social smiling. If you smiled at her, she'd smile back, and she had everything that a typical child would have. So everything I just mentioned, she doesn't do anymore. She doesn't respond to her name. She doesn't do social smiling. That doesn't mean she won't smile at us, but we can, you know, smile at her. We can be like, Penelope, and no response. So she does it very much on her own terms. She doesn't really care when we leave the room. She stopped having a response about that around like 13 to 14 months. She was clapping. She was saying mama. She cried and made the biggest fit if we left the room. I always had to be in eyesight of her. She wanted to cuddle with me at night. She seemed like a typical kid. When she would see Lonnie or I, she would crawl up to us like to see us. And with time, that just kind of stopped. For her, the interest in playing just never grew beyond picking up an item and looking at it and being curious about it, but just kind of being like, bleh. And then with time, we noticed that she wasn't really caring about toys. Like if she picked up a toy, she just stemmed with it in front of her face. And then she was just very fixated with strings and cords, spaghetti, sticks, just random, anything that she could stem with her in her hands that was like long that she could hold and do it in front of her face. During therapy, when Liam has therapy, she just kind of does her own thing and never really tries to engage with Liam in any way. She would never purposely come up to us ever. So she wouldn't crawl to us. She wouldn't come show us anything. The only time she comes up to us is by accident, is if she's just kind of walking and then we're just there, or she's crawling and she hits our leg or something like that. Sometimes she is engaging and interactive and she gives okay eye contact, but it has to be on her terms. For her to interact with us, I have to work really hard for it. A lot of these things I'm mentioning aren't things necessarily that we notice, but things that the therapists have noticed and the doctors noticed. Looking back, I'm like, oh yeah, that definitely makes sense. She gets very hyper focused on things like the door stopper or following the baseboard, stimming with spaghetti, or the laptop. She really loves screens and like visual stimulation and things like that. So if you try to take her away from those erupts into a tantrum. Something else that we noticed a lot is that Penelope, again, she seemed like she was off in her own world. Like that's kind of a given, but we noticed that she wasn't aware of others around her and kind of what was happening around her. Someone could come new in the room, it didn't faze her. Someone could hurt, fall down, just didn't really have a reaction at all to it. It isn't like she would be like, oh, and then decide she didn't care or something, but she never really would react to anything new changing in her environment that way. And I know that every child grows at their own rate. This isn't me saying, oh, I wish Penelope was someone else, because the truth of the matter is that she was born with autism. I am sharing what we saw, the signs that we saw in Penelope, to help other people. I am sharing some emotions with it because it is still raw and it's still real, and it is okay for me to say I thought that my life with Penelope was going to be different than it is now, and that it's going to be years from now. Something else we notice in addition to the no pretend play is that she doesn't try to imitate sounds, and she doesn't try to imitate actions other than if you clap your hands, she'll clap her hands too. She's been doing that since 12 months. If you say like mama or you say dada or something, she doesn't try to imitate that. She doesn't try to imitate action. So if I play peekaboo with her, she doesn't try to imitate that. So for communication gets very tricky because a lot of people just kind of categorize autism under nonverbal. So if a child is delayed, they automatically think autism, but then when you say, oh, my young toddler was diagnosed, that's when everyone wants to say, well, every child talks at a different time. It's very true. Every child does. But there's a lot of nonverbal communication. There's a lot of things that happen before and during talking that is crucial. And those are the red flags that are for autism. It's not that my 16-month-old wasn't talking. She wasn't waving, she wasn't pointing, she wasn't having any gestures. In addition to any of those, she wasn't bringing me a cup if she was thirsty. She wasn't doing anything to communicate with me in any way, non-verbally or verbally. In addition to not pointing, she also wasn't follow pointing. So if I said, Penelope, look, she wouldn't even look at my hand or follow in the area I was pointing. It's the same thing with responding to her name. It's almost like I didn't say her name. So we've been really working on it. Liam at this stage would at least respond to his name, you know, maybe 2 times out of 10. Penelope's 0. It's definitely a little bit different. As I will talk about in her story, we did have concerns that maybe it was a hearing issue, but with time we realized that she would turn towards noises, but not necessarily towards her name. So basically we have to make a lot of commotion, and then once she turns, we do positive reinforcement. Kind of the same thing we did with Liam, because I'm not minimizing Liam's struggle. If you have a child that's only responding to their name 2 out of 10 times, it's hard. Liam responds to his name about half now, and that's hard too. So it's a struggle no matter what. She also wasn't responding to like one step commands. Go take this to dad, or go sit down, or come here. Those are things that they should be able to do. By 19 months old, I could tell Lex to go take his diaper and throw it in the trash, and he would pick up his diaper and throw it in the trash. If I was changing his diaper, I could say butt up and he would do it. She said mama starting at 12 months, and she kept that up until about 16 months, and then she stopped saying it, and then she started saying it again like a week ago. So it's just kind of hit and miss. She's never said it functionally. She doesn't say it functionally now. It's just part of her babbling. She does babble with about 4 different consonants. She does a lot with her tongue, like that was not attractive. Her babbling's different, but she's still babbling, and that's always a great sign. So overall, those are the things that she has as far as signs of autism, and it's also what led her to get the autism diagnosis. Sometimes when you're doing these evaluations, you don't expect your child to show them everything, and you feel like they didn't get a good picture of your child fully. Penelope did everything in her evaluation that I told them that she did. And in fact, that's in her diagnosis report. It's consistent with what we're saying, and it's consistent with the diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So she showed them everything. Now, I watched one video. I follow this one channel. I love her so much. It's called Nurturing Neurodiversity, and if her channel name doesn't make you love her, you'll just love her. I enjoy watching her, and it's actually ironic. Her videos are the ones I binge watched when we were getting ready for Liam's autism diagnosis, and then come to find out, like, she follows me on Instagram. It was cool for someone to be the support for me when I was the support for her when her son was going through diagnosis. On the videos that she talked about the signs of autism she saw in her son, I liked it because at the end she talked about the things that made her think that it was an autism. Because right, there's a lot of stereotypes. We think, oh, autism should look this way. Not every child has every sign, and some child has strengths and things like that. So that's kind of what I'm going to do now, is kind of talk about the things that made us think, oh, Penelope might not be on the spectrum. So she didn't have the worst eye contact. She had better eye contact than Liam. When we would sing to her, she had great eye contact. When she wanted something, when it was something she loved, she had good eye contact. As I said, she doesn't imitate playing peekaboo, but she does smile. She seems to enjoy the game. She just doesn't know how to like participate in the game. The fact that she clapped and she would imitate when we clapped, that seemed like a great thing. Imitation is something that stereotypically they say that kids on the spectrum struggle with. So I thought that was a great sign. I think in the end, it wasn't things that Penelope was doing that made me question if she had autism or not. I think deep down I knew. I was confused, and I didn't understand how I could have 2 typical children and then have so many others on the autism spectrum. When you guys are confused and you ask, like, how did that happen? There are sometimes I feel the same way. I mean, Penelope looked like she was going to be a typical child. What kept me from thinking, oh yeah, she's definitely on the spectrum, isn't specific things she did other than those things mentioned. It was me thinking, how am I going to have this many special needs kids? And it scared me. Not because there's something wrong with the diagnosis or it's a horrible thing, it's a tragedy. No, it's not. But the thought of her struggling just broke my heart. It still breaks my heart, and we're still taking things day by day. I'll kind of go over the basics of what happened. Penelope was completely on target for everything, not just the developmental milestones, but the social milestones, the emotional ones, all the things that you kind of look for. I feel like the ones that aren't thought about when you think of a child on the spectrum. And I did. I realized when she was a baby, she was the most typical baby I've had since Lonnie Jr. You know, around 9-10 months old, we realized that she wasn't eating correctly. 10 to 11 months old, she started to do a little stim with her hand. From there, it just kind of grew to where she is now. From 12 to 14 months basically was when we were getting ready for our trip to Colorado. We lived in Florida at the time, and then we were also kind of behind the scenes, not only getting ready for this trip, but then getting ready for a move that was probably going to be coming up as long as everything with our trip went good. And then the pandemic happened. I was so focused on making sure that we were getting help for Liam and Noah and Lex and all of those, that I just thought that I had a child that had feeding issues. I didn't realize that, you know, she should be pointing and waving, and she should follow point, and she should be responding with her name consistently. There were so many things that just kind of slipped by me that I did not realize until we had moved here. I was getting her ready for early intervention. I was getting her ready for her 15-month appointment, completely oblivious. Like, I really honestly thought she just was having some issues with feeding. I was just completely in denial about it at the time and didn't even want to consider it. I'm like, we're just gonna work with what we have right now. What we have right now is, I know Penelope should be eating more than she should. I know that she should be on solids. She shouldn't be on formula 100%. Let's work with that and let's just ignore everything else. Well, when you go to get early intervention, they kind of work with everything. It's not just about one specific thing. They kind of screen your child for everything. I knew that was coming up, and it made me nervous, but I also had to take her to her 15-month appointment. So to kind of mentally prepare myself, about a week before, I had pulled out the ASQ that they do. It's basically like a screening to see if your child has any like developmental delay or anything. I pulled it out and I read the first 4 or 5 questions, and she didn't meet any of it. I just put it away. It was for communication. So obviously I was like, that's fine. She's not talking right now, but it's normal. Plenty of kids don't talk by this time. Like, it is fine. I'm not worried about it. As I watched my daughter more and I Googled the red flags for autism, and I realized that she wasn't engaging with us, that her stimming had increased. She was just kind of doing her own thing. I knew at that point I needed to find out what was going on. I pulled up the ASQ screening tool that the pediatrician was going to use at her appointment. There's, 35 questions on there.
A few moments later.
Okay, I guessed that really well. There's exactly 30 questions on there, and it goes from like communication, gross motor, fine motor, social, personal skills, all of these things. And out of 30 questions, she only got one of them, and that was, can your child climb on surfaces? Which she could. If there was like a low Tupperware, she could climb on it, and I was like, yeah, she could do that. But that was the only thing. I know, as a mom to 6 kids, I know that every child does things at different rates, but as a special needs mom, I know that a child should have more than one thing. I knew that at that point we were in trouble. I'm not going to go deep into her story because I'm going to tell this story. Parents watching this video for their own child is probably wondering like how we got from point A to point Z, and maybe you don't want to watch that big long video. Basically, she scored 4 to 8 months old on her early intervention evaluation, which she was 15 months at the time. It's normal for a 15-month-old not to score 15 months on everything. It's just like a kind of a range, but for her to be so significantly behind let me know that we had something going on. Like this was more than just a little bit of a delay. Then at her doctor's appointment, the doctor expressed concern and therapist expressed concern. So from there, it just kind of started this ball that rolled really, really fast here. And so we were so lucky to be able to get in and have her evaluated by so many amazing doctors at the Children's Hospital, so many amazing therapists in the area, and to really get a thorough answer. Like, I feel like this isn't something that they just watched my kid for half an hour and been like, oh yeah, she has autism. This was something that they were very, very thorough on. If there was any other explanation, if there was any other answer, I would be giving that answer, because this was something that I did not take lightly. It was something that was really hard for me to go into. We love Penelope so very much, but we didn't want this to be her story. We just want her to be her best self. Again, if you're watching this and your child does a few of these things, don't think, oh yeah, they're definitely on the autism spectrum. But if your child does a lot of these things, then it definitely wouldn't hurt to reach out. Not every area will evaluate as early as they did for Penelope. We went through a children's hospital, but a lot of places will evaluate starting at age 2. It's always good to start early intervention. It's always good to be on the lookout on these things and see how they kind of evolve. Thank you for the support through this. I will be streaming on you now like I do every night. So if you want to come in and ask questions, you can. Please be kind. I know it's scary sometimes watching a video like this thinking everything she's saying sounds like a typical kid. For us, Penelope had so many traits that it was just easier. There was no doubt for any of the doctors. There's no doubt for us. There's no doubt for any professionals that come in contact with Penelope because of the amount of traits she has, but also the severity of some of the traits. I'm rambling now, so I'm going to go. I'm gonna enjoy some time with Danielle. We will see you guys, not tomorrow, but we'll see you the next day.
Where you move make me blind. You will always be there. There's no doubt in my mind. You will always be there. Heading out to see ya and leave the rest behind.